This is Asterisk Democracy Now! At democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, alongside Juan Gonzalez. Today, we continue our coverage of Tuesday's extraordinary event, the unprecedented assembly of 800 U.S. generals and admirals who were flown in from bases around the world to the Marine Corps Base in Quantico, Virginia. The meeting, called by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, brought together the nation's top military leaders for what many described as something resembling a political rally, rather than an official military briefing. President Trump addressed the officers for over an hour, but Hegseth spoke first. Hegseth declared that the military must always be ready for combat, not just defense. "We train warriors, not defenders," he said. Defense is reactionary. War, when waged on our own terms, is decisive. We fight to win. He called it a day of liberation for America's warriors, emphasizing that soldiers exist to kill people and break things, not to conform to political correctness or polite society. President Trump followed with his own speech, asserting that the United States faced an invasion from within, claiming that while past politicians focused on foreign conflicts in Africa and elsewhere, the real threat was internal. He likened domestic unrest to a hidden enemy that doesn't wear uniforms, insisting his administration was finally defending America's borders rather than those of other nations. Joining us now is Eugene Fidel, senior research scholar at Yale Law School and expert in military justice. He co-authored a piece in The Hill titled Asterisk Trump, and Hegseth want to turn the military into a tool of personal loyalty. Fidel, a former U.S. Coast Guard judge advocate, described the gathering as both unusual and troubling. He noted that many officers questioned the necessity and cost of being summoned when the event could have been streamed, according to Fidel. The spectacle served as a massive photo opportunity and a loyalty test, echoing political optics of past administrations. He compared it to prior mission-accomplished moments, emphasizing that such displays blur the line between civilian leadership and military autonomy. When asked about Hegseth's language, such as calling soldiers killers and emphasizing war over defense, Fidel argued it reflected a deliberate rejection of decades of progressive reform in the U.S. Armed Forces. Since World War II, he said, the military has evolved toward racial integration, gender inclusion, and respect for diversity. But terms like anti-woke and hostility toward diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives signal a return to exclusionary ideals. Fidel further criticized the event's religious undertones and authoritarian tone. He expressed alarm at threats to prosecute service members who file complaints that later prove unsubstantiated, warning that such policies would silence legitimate grievances. He described this as a clear attempt to intimidate, undermining accountability within the ranks. When asked about the potential consequences, Fidel cautioned that senior officers might soon face orders that test their legal and ethical limits. He advised that they consult independent legal counsel, as internal military lawyers ultimately represent the government, not individual commanders. Some directives, he suggested, might violate laws such as the Posse Comitatus Act, which restricts military involvement in domestic law enforcement. Fidel also warned that the administration's anti-woke stance could harm morale and diversity in the armed forces. Roughly 40% of U.S. service members are African American or Latino, and he argued that inclusion has long been essential to unit cohesion and morale. Reversing those gains, he said, risks turning back the clock to a segregated, male-dominated military culture. He highlighted the irony that, while America has long celebrated its diversity, recent rhetoric seeks to erase that progress. Fidel connected this shift to the administration's sidelining of women and minority officers, calling it part of a broader rollback of social progress. Finally, Fidel condemned President Trump's praise for America's wars against Native American tribes. Calling it deeply disturbing, he reminded listeners that such conflicts were acts of conquest and dispossession, not moments of glory. To celebrate that history, he said, is to glorify one of the darkest chapters of our nation's past. Fidel concluded by urging Americans to pay attention to these developments, describing the Quantico event as a warning sign of political influence creeping into the military. Absolutely. Here's a continuation of your rewritten story, following the same tone, depth, and narrative structure, expanding it as if it were a *** journalistic or documentary-style continuation, ***, the original report. Following the unprecedented gathering at Quantico, discussions across Washington intensified about the implications of blending political messaging with military command. Critics argued that the event blurred the constitutional separation between civilian oversight and partisan influence, while supporters insisted it was simply an effort to strengthen national unity and morale among the armed forces. Several retired officers spoke anonymously to reporters, describing the atmosphere at the event as uncomfortably political. One former Marine general called it the most overtly partisan display I've ever seen in a uniformed company, emphasizing that the tone of the speeches suggested loyalty, not to the Constitution, but to a particular leader. Another officer mentioned that while attendance was mandatory, few knew the exact purpose of the meeting until the speeches began. Outside the military, legal experts and civil rights organizations expressed alarm. They pointed to the historical dangers of politicizing the armed forces, a pattern seen in fragile democracies where military loyalty shifts from the nation to individual rulers. The American Civil Liberties Union and several veterans groups issued statements condemning the event, urging Congress to investigate whether Defense Department resources were being used for political propaganda. Meanwhile, internal reports began to surface suggesting growing unease within the Pentagon. Sources described quiet debates among senior officials about how to respond to directives that seemed to contradict long-standing norms. "No one wants to disobey orders," one Pentagon insider said. "But everyone understands that lawful orders are not the same as personal commands. There's a line that can't be crossed." At Yale, Eugene Fidel continued to speak out, warning that the military's moral compass must not be realigned to serve political ends. In a subsequent interview, he compared the rhetoric at Quantico to tactics historically used to foster blind obedience within authoritarian regimes. "When leaders redefine patriotism as personal loyalty," Fidel explained, "you're eroding the foundation of civilian control. That's when democracies begin to tremble." Despite these warnings, President Trump's remarks resonated with some factions inside the armed forces who felt alienated by modern social reforms. Certain commentators on conservative media praised the event, arguing that it restored pride among soldiers frustrated by what they viewed as bureaucratic and cultural overreach. Yet, even among those who supported the administration's military stance, there was unease about the overtly combative tone in the weeks following the gathering. Social media amplified divisions. Clips from the Quantico speeches circulated widely online, sparking debates over patriotism, discipline, and freedom. Hashtags such as #LoyaltyFirst and #WarriorSpirit trended alongside #DefendDemocracy and #NotYourArmy, symbolizing a fractured public discourse on the role of the military in national identity. Lawmakers, both parties, began calling for briefings. Members of the Senate Armed Services Committee requested a transcript of the speeches, concerned about the possibility that active duty officers had been used for political staging. Some called for hearings on the misuse of military authority, while others accused critics of overreacting to what they described as a motivational event behind closed doors. However, Pentagon officials reportedly began reinforcing ethical training programs for officers, emphasizing the distinction between lawful civilian oversight and partisan allegiance. Several internal memos later leaked to the press, reminded service members of their oath to defend the Constitution, not any political leader. As Fidel warned in his concluding remarks, the real test of democracy is not fought on foreign battlefields, it's fought in our own institutions. When those in power demand personal loyalty from the armed forces, they are not strengthening the nation. They are testing its soul. The Quantico gathering, now dubbed by some analysts as the loyalty meeting, will become a defining moment in America's ongoing struggle to balance strength with democracy, revealing how fragile that balance truly is when patriotism is redefined by power rather than principle.